Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War frontline update, first part thereof for the 3rd of May 2025. Sorry it's a little bit late, my boy he broke his ankle in a football match, and actually the return fixture, last fixture of the season was today against the team that he broke his ankle. My boy's team should have won the league, actually lost that previous game, they beat them 5-1 today. Beautiful day, sun is out, daisies are on the playing field. A lovely morning, but I'm a little bit late to it. Crazy times. The election results are just coming in Australia. Not so much an upset. It was thought that it was going to happen, but it was a bigger result. It's looking like it's a bigger success for the Labour government in Australia, beating the Liberals and the coalition there quite handily by the looks of it. So Anthony Albanese will return, and Peter Dutton will lose his own seat by the looks of it as the opposition leader. So that's a repudiation to some degree of MAGA, as that was in effect there. So I'm going to do a video later. I might even do it as part of a live looking at the UK local elections, the Australian national election, and probably other things. I've got a lot of content to get out, but it's a beautiful day. Anyway, let's get on with the hits and losses. We have 1,170 personnel lost, which is a pretty consistent number. We are seeing it there or thereabouts quite a lot at the moment. 4 tanks, that's obviously very low. 48 troop carrying AFVs, that's incredible. Like, don't often get 0 in that category. 48 artillery systems, that's about just over double the daily average, so pretty useful there. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 121 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. So, fairly average numbers there still in terms of artillery and personnel and vehicles and fuel tanks. Some pretty heavy losses. What are we seeing to support some of these ideas? IL-76 cargo plane filled with coffins of Russian soldiers at Orenburg Airport. So you often see these videos of warehouses full of coffins and stacks of body bags. They are definitely taking heavy losses. That is for sure. Now, there's a lot of talk concerning this. Now, initially last night, okay, you've got 2 options here. Either a V5 Magura USV unmanned surface drone has shot down a helicopter and another one's shot down a fixed-wing aircraft, or it shot down a fixed-wing aircraft, but they initially thought it was a helicopter. So the initial reports were this: Russian helicopter possibly down by marine drones. So last night, as we're going to see in a second, there was a huge drone attack on particularly Novorossiysk. Novorossiysk is where the Black Sea Fleet is now held, and actually a lot of these drones were USVs on the surface of the Black Sea. So big drone attack, Novorossiysk targeted. Early reports is that fragmentary messages by Russian sources associated with military aviation suggest a military helicopter may have been shot down over the Black Sea by an unmanned surface vessel armed with anti-air missiles. The USVs were reportedly heading towards Novorossiysk. Later, Russian sources thanked a civilian cargo ship crew for rescuing the military pilots. Quote, a large group of USVs of all types, including USVs with air defense systems, is operating near Novorossiysk. Water temperature in that area is 13 degrees Celsius. To the crew of the cargo ship that rescued our pilots today, thank you. Please contact me. And that's coming from Fighter Bomber, the pretty reliable Russian, I think, active aviation, active pilot Telegram channel. Now, okay, so OSINT Technical saying Russian mail bloggers report that Ukrainian unmanned surface vehicle shot down a Russian helicopter over the Black Sea, likely with an R-73 SAM surface-to-air missile. The Ukrainian SAM USV was escorting a larger USV strike group when it shot down the Russian helicopter. And then, today was a difficult evening for our aviation. Thank God everyone returned home, although not as they should have been and slightly wet. In other words, the crew was saved, but the airframe was lost. But it's all nonsense, because before that we were worried for several hours, everyone who knew. If your gear gets wet or drowns, write me a private message. Well, actually, so we see there is here evidence of a Russian helicopter shooting at Ukrainian drones. Here's footage from a Russian helicopter chasing Ukrainian naval drones in the Black Sea. So that was definitely happening. And here is the longer message from Fighter Bomber. Some of it's a little bit confusing. Make of it what you will. Let's actually read this. And BEKs are like unmanned surface vehicles. So I'll say USVs when I say that, and that means those kind of V5 Megura Sea Baby type drones. Everything written below is a product of the author's imagination, and of course all coincidences are accidental. So it's giving himself a get out of jail free card there, because I presume in case the Russian authorities come back for him. As you understand, yesterday was a difficult day for naval aviation. Naval aviation, represented by its best representatives from one of the assault aviation regiments, took the rap for the entire Black Sea Fleet. The Crest, the Ukrainians, brought more than 3 dozen, so that's more than 36 USVs of all types to the Novorossiysk area, both regular and USVs carrying FPV drones. So we've seen that in Crimea. Now they're taking them all the way to Novorossiysk, so that you could get drones flying off those USVs and hitting the port of Novorossiysk, or hitting the ships there. Incredible stuff. And cover the whole thing with USVs with man pads on board, man portable air defense systems. So something like a Stinger. Although what they're using are R-73 missiles. At the same time, dozens of drones were launched from the Odessa area with targets in Novorossiysk. That is, the strike was planned at night, and it was supposed to be a group one, a single group. For this, the USVs were accumulated around 50 kilometers from Novorossiysk. The peculiarity of the destruction of the USVs by aviation is that it is possible to effectively destroy them only in conditions of visual visibility. That is, the pilot must see the USV, the target, with his eyes during the attack. This is due to the absence on the planet, not only in our country but all armies in the world, of controlled or homing aircraft weapons that can reliably destroy a small-sized, high-speed maneuvering target. Therefore, ultra-modern 4+++ aircraft destroyed BECs like 100 years ago, so USVs 100 years ago. I don't quite understand that last sentence, but does he mean 4th generation aircraft? The point is that they don't seem to be able to blow up these USVs using, precision guided weapons. You have to see them visually and take them out with machine guns. With a cannon and bombs from a distance of 1.5 to 2 kilometers, with the exit from the attack a couple of dozen, maybe 100 meters from the target. In general, the most effective means against the USVs is, of course, a USV helicopter with a machine gun on board. Or does he mean a drone helicopter? But a helicopter over the sea is a practically ideal target for both man pads. So I think he just means a general helicopter with a machine gun on board. But the helicopter over the sea becomes then a target itself for these USVs with man pads, and even a USV with a machine gun, because there are no tree lines, no hills, or anything at all in the sea that you can hide behind. A more difficult target is, of course, an airplane. An airplane is more difficult solely due to its speed, but as I said above, airplanes are also forced to approach the backs almost point blank, inevitably coming under fire from man pads, SAMs, and remotely controlled machine guns installed on them. So that is pretty interesting there. He finishes off saying the multi-ton warships with all their guns, missiles, mines and torpedoes solved this problem very simply. They effed off. They retreated to more advantageous positions, and the USVs are dealt with by aviation, drone operators and coastal defences from towers on the shore. After the ship was hit, the crew found themselves in the water. So when he says the ship, I presume that means... Well, yeah, what does he mean here? Surrounded by enemy USVs, the VMSK and the boat certainly allow the crew to survive in water with a temperature of 13 degrees for several hours, but the time is not infinite. In this case, there are 2 ways to save the crew: with the help of a rescue helicopter and a diver, or with the help of a rescue vessel. The PSS helicopter, elsewhere I've seen that's PS5 helicopter, is almost guaranteed to be hit by the next missile from the same USV. The rescue vessel is almost guaranteed to be sunk by kamikaze submarines or torpedoes from the Megura. The complex task was solved by the crew of a civilian dry cargo ship, which, not paying attention to the unmanned sea drones, the machine guns, the drones, torpedoes and other threats, came to the aid of the crew and lifted them on board. It goes without saying that the Ukrainians saw and controlled the entire rescue process from the USVs, but for some reason they did not attack the civilian ship. interesting. So that could be very good of the Ukrainians to hold back from hitting that ship. At one point, there were 5 USVs around one of the crew members. Therefore, the main characters of yesterday were definitely the crew of the dry cargo ship. I hope they all will at least be given a diploma, so some kind of award. Okay, fascinating, but we don't quite know what was shot down. The early reports were a helicopter, then we are seeing this morning, and there's confirmation of this from video footage. So this definitely happened. On May the 2nd, 2025, Ukraine's Defense Intelligence, the HURMO, Special Unit Group 13, in coordination with the SBU and Defense Forces, destroyed a Russian Su-30 fighter jet, using a Magura maritime drone. This marks the first time in history a combat aircraft has been taken down by a USV. Actually, that's not true, because we've seen 2 helicopters, I think, taken out previously. This is an earlier post from Special Kherson Cat. As per Russian sources yesterday evening, a Ukrainian unmanned surface vessel armed with an R-73 air-to-air missile shot down a Russian Su-30 naval fighter roughly 50 kilometers west of Novorossiysk, marking the first time in history that a military aircraft has been downed by an unmanned maritime drone. I think that's a military fixed-wing aircraft. Because as we see here, no, it's on this one. Yes. So this is the video that you can see, right? And that shows the destruction of the Su-30, and you've got this kind of a display there that gives you an indication of, you know, how they're doing it and what's going on. Well, actually, Special Kherson Cat says on the video you can see that the Magura has received an update to its interface compared to the previous encounter with the Russian aviation when 2 Russian helicopters were downed by R-73 missiles. So it's not the first time that a military aircraft has been shot down, because that's happened previously, but it's the first time the fixed-wing airframe has been taken out. This went back to December 2024, December 31st, for the first time in history. Russian military helicopter was shot down by a Ukrainian sea drone. Historic strike. Soldiers of the main director of Intelligence Special Unit Group 13, the same group taking down the helicopter there. So 1 or 2 helicopters have been taken down previously. I think, if I remember correctly, 1 was shot down and 1 was badly damaged and returned limped back, if I remember correctly from that initial encounter. Last night, possibly a helicopter was hit. I think that's probably unlikely that a helicopter and a fixed-wing airplane was hit, but it seems that definitely a Su-30 has been taken down there. As Edward Hunter Christie said, it's a remarkable development that proves once again the extraordinary ingenuity and fighting skill of our Ukrainian friends. We want these gallant fighters on our side. They are the shield of Europe. So, yep, for the first time ever, that's happened. $50 million loss. Okay, then here's a video of a Russian drone using an RPG-26. So this looks to be an RPG, not just an RPG warhead, as you know, the explosive on board, but an RPG that's firing its own warhead. So this is not a kamikaze drone. This is a drone carrying, and that's going to be sizable, because you know those things aren't, well, they're not crazy heavy, but they're certainly heavier than just the warhead. So fascinating that the Russians are using that. They are still innovating, of course. Right, we're going to go on to the distance strikes, which will include the attack on Novorossiysk. First, we'll start off with the Russian Shahed attack, as per usual, on Ukraine, and we're back up to seriously high numbers of drones. 183 drones sent, 77 shot down, 73 suppressed by electronic warfare. That's 150 in total, given 33 drones getting through. That is a considerable percentage. Still, I think it's just below, so if I do the math, says it's just below 20% still, but really a large number of drones getting through. You know, the more drones you are sending, you know, 20% of a bigger number is a bigger number, right? So, than 20% of a smaller number. So, you know, the Russians are having much greater success in not having their drones get shot down, and they're also sending more and more back up to levels prior to when I think the manufacturing facilities must have been hit. In Russia, I think they are now back up to those previous levels to some large degree. And there are 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles that have got through as well. Sorry if you can hear screaming babies and whatnot in the background. So Euromaidan press saying Russia has attacked Kharkiv at the time. Right now, they were saying last night, 17 strikes on Kharkiv. 12 injured, actually far more than that. Entire neighborhoods on fire. Russian Shahed drones hit multiple targets across the city overnight. One was caught on video slamming directly into a residential building in Saltivitsky, the district closest to the Russian border. Some really, arresting imagery coming out of Kharkiv here. You can see some widespread fires, vehicles on fire there with residential buildings, likewise also aflame. The number of people injured there, well, it says risen to 6. Actually, later on, it was seen as 51 injured in Kharkiv, varying severity and acute shock. Among them, 2 girls aged 11 and 16. Russian terrorists and drones with thermobaric warheads struck Kharkiv, which is a claim there from Max 24. Zelensky said right now Russia's once again attacking Ukraine. Kharkiv has been attacked by dozens of Shahids. Residential buildings, businesses and civilian infrastructure have been damaged. As of now, more than, he said, 40 people were injured. That's now up to over 50, as we saw. There were and could be there were and could not be any military targets. Doesn't quite make sense. Russia is hitting residential buildings at the very time when Ukrainians are at home, when they are putting their children to bed. Only inhumans can give such orders and carry them out, says Max 24. While the world is delaying decisions, although this could be part of the Zelensky, probably part of the Zelensky quote. While the world is delaying decisions, almost every night in Ukraine turns into a horror that results in the loss of lives. Ukraine needs strengthened air defences. We need strong and real decisions from our partners, the United States, Europe, all our partners who seek peace. And some pretty incredible. That's where we just saw the fire previously. That's now been put out with that van on fire. But yeah, some again incredible pictures. I do marvel at the pictures that come out from these horrific strikes that often give you a real sense of place. But anyway, moving on. This came in yesterday from Andrew, who wrote in the chat, in the thread, in regards to drone interception rates. This is an anecdotal evidence, but as a Ukrainian civilian whose city gets attacked by Shahids quite often, I have to say that they now sound very different and they fly faster. The Russians have definitely had them improved, and honestly, it's horrifying. I hope that a way to better intercept them is being developed. So that's from someone on the ground saying, right, they are sounding different. Something has changed with those Shahid drones. Now going to the Ukrainian strikes last night, and yet again, we have had widespread attacks on Russia with very little information in terms of actual battle damage assessment. The Ukrainians have hammered the crap out of Russia, I think, for the last week, certainly last 3 or 4 days, particularly in terms of Crimea, and last night, Crimea going down to Novorossiysk. But we get scant, really decent evidence of the effects. According to Russian sources, Ukrainian drones, including uncrewed naval drones, launched a massive attack on Crimea, Rostov Oblast and Krasnodar Krai. So that's essentially, we go back to the previous map there, should have some idea. Here we go. So this is Rostov, this is your Rostov Oblast, Krasnodar Oblast, and Crimea. So basically all around here appears to have been heavily targeted by the Ukrainians. Drone attacks were also reported in Bryansk, Belgorod and Kursk Oblast, so the 3 oblasts just north of the Ukrainian border as well. Lots of activity then, a fair bit of imagery coming out contemporaneously, but very little understanding after the event as to what might have been destroyed or even targeted, to be perfectly honest. The Russian Ministry of Defense has claimed that on the night of May the 3rd, so last night, 11 missiles and 170 Ukrainian fixed-wing unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down, nearly 100 over occupied Crimea. So that's 170 aerial drones, 11 missiles, and then we hear claim of 2 dozen, 3 dozen naval drones, possibly even 2 dozen and 3 dozen, right? Because they talked about 2 dozen coming from Odessa, and then there was just a general talk about 3 dozen and amassing, but I don't know if those were the same numbers, the same drones, just quantified twice, or who knows. But a lot of USVs as well as these UAVs. Okay, so the Russians claim that 96 drones were shot down over Crimea, 47 over Krasnodar Krai, 9 over Rostov, 8 over Bryansk, 8 over Kursk, and 2 over Belgorod. Air defense systems on duty over the Black Sea destroyed 8 Storm Shadow air-launched cruise missiles and 3 Ukrainian Neptune MD cruise missiles. So the claim is that 8 Storm Shadows are taken out by the Russian air defenses and 3 Neptune missiles. Of course, we have no evidence that was indeed the case last night. And then they say 14 unmanned boats, so USVs in the Black Sea, were destroyed. But we've heard other claims to there being 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen plus drones. So I don't know. You can do the maths, you can do the speculation as to, what the reality was. And I think we can safely conclude that the Ukrainians probably sent more drones and missiles at the Russians last night than they have done for quite some time, certainly in terms of the USVs. So lots of videos, Krasnodar Krai and other areas, showing drone explosions, the sound of drones, air defenses going off. There's a very arresting video of a drone slamming into a Russian residential building, as I've said before, and it's not just trying to defend the Ukrainians and trying to get them off the hook, but you can rest assured that 100% of the drones that do hit residential buildings in Russia will be as a result of either malfunction or electronic warfare or air defenses hitting them, because the Ukrainians just don't have the there are several things. A, they don't have the resources to waste them throwing them at residential buildings. That's not worth their while. They need to be hitting military targets or energy infrastructure or similar, right? So they really, it's really not worth their while doing that. But it's also not worth their while doing that in terms of the PR, right? If they're seen to routinely do this and be aiming for these buildings, they would just not get military aid from their supporters, their allies. The Ukrainians have no interest in hitting Russian civilian infrastructure. The Russians, on the other hand, don't care one whit. The Russians are either, I think, more careless or do target civilian infrastructure. They certainly targeted hospitals and infrastructure that is clearly, borderline not military. Well, not even borderline. They're clearly non-military targets. We can have an argument as to whether they definitely directly target civilian buildings and have done over the course of the war. I think they have scant regard for civilian life. So it kind of almost doesn't matter. They're throwing things dangerously over big cities that they know they're going to get shot down or electronically interfered with, and they'll fall in those cities and do damage to those cities. You look at Kherson, and they are 100% targeting civilians there. There's no doubt about that. So they have form for targeting like hospitals and for murdering civilians in Kherson with a human safari. That's taking place with the smaller drones. Also in Kherson, they've got artillery and actually sometimes Shahed drones, not so often, but there have been Shahed drones slamming into civilian infrastructure there. So, I think there's a good case that the Russians do routinely target civilians on purpose. I don't think there is a case that you can build that Ukraine have been doing that on purpose. But anyway, let's go to Tim White's thread of what happened. So my morning thread, he said, is consisting of collating tons of information, reports, videos, and photos, checking my sources, eliminating the nonsense and the hyperbole. And now that's done, let the flood of info about the night attack on Russia commence. As I mentioned, the main target was Novorossiysk. So that building was hit in Novorossiysk. The first video was CCTV footage of something hitting an apartment building in Novorossiysk, the port city where the Russian Navy now keeps its Black Sea fleet. Here's a close-up of the same incident. It seems highly likely that Russian electronic warfare caused the Ukrainian drone to go out of control, and that's what I would agree with. Officials in Novorossiysk say there were 4 casualties. 2 of the injured were children. 2 buildings were hit in Novorossiysk, while other homes suffered damage elsewhere in the Krasnodar region of Russia. Russia says 170 drones were shot down over the country this morning. 47 were reportedly shot down in this region in Krasnodar. Clearly, apartment blocks were not intended targets, but using air defense over densely populated areas does bring risks. It is also evident that Russia's air defense was overwhelmed. Some videos later in the morning show Ukrainian drones just chugging along undisturbed towards targets in Novorossiysk. So there you go. Russians clearly have run out of the ability to shoot something like that down in an area which is a very sensitive, sensitive area with lots of high value targets. This is the home of their Black Sea fleet, and it's also got lots of energy infrastructure and all sorts there too. And yet those drones are just happily chugging away. Previous time Ukraine attacked Novorossiysk, it hit an oil depot. That was the other night. Not the ports, but playing by Russia's rules, a ceasefire only on energy infrastructure. It seems the port was the main target this time. This video shot towards there, and smoke can be seen rising. So it could be port infrastructure being targeted, as the Russians have done with Odessa. Here's a clip with nearer Novorossiysk docks, and we can see more smoke and hear a long, loud rumble, which I'm guessing is not so good for Russia. Getting precise information will be difficult, but hopefully satellite shots may capture some proof. Again, battle damage assessment is thin on the ground from this week particularly. In fact, just in general, I think that it's more difficult to find information on Ukrainian strikes than it used to be. I think there's definitely been a sea change there. There was damage elsewhere in Krasnodar region too. This video was taken at a homeowner in Yurovka village, 60 kilometers northwest of Novorossiysk, and it's probable that a drone was shot down there. The casualty count has actually risen to 5 in Novorossiysk. Russia is outraged, of course, but no one dares to contemplate how peaceful their lives were and how there was no threat before Putin launched a full-scale invasion 1,165 days ago. So there is that. So lots of videos. You've seen that one being thrown on the socials about the drone strikes last night in Russia. If we go back to a previous strike, and again, like I keep saying, information is difficult to come by. Tim White was talking about we have to wait for satellite images to come out often these days. Here's Maxar imagery of the Mozdok airbase from the 10th of September 2024. It's a long time ago. But just thought I'd throw this one out there. We can see 2 dismantled Su-34 fuselages plus bunches of wings and stabilizers dumped behind one of the buildings. Does that indicate that a strike had been successful on some Sukhoi aircraft? Who knows? But they've got bits of them thrown around. Thanks to low-res satellite imagery, we know that the fuselages appeared there in September 2024. They moved them a bit from time to time, but both are still visible in the latest imagery from April 2025. In case anyone was wondering how to tell the difference between a disassembled fuselage and a complete Su-34 in low-res imagery, the fuselage presents itself as a small blue dot, while the whole aircraft appears to be significantly larger blue dot. The heap of wings and stabilizers appeared between August the 21st and the 2nd of September. It's still there, as shown in the imagery from April the 22nd of this year. Whether these 2 Su-34s were damaged beyond repair or simply retired due to the end of service life, it looks like they will never fly again. 2 fewer bombers in the Russian arsenal. So you can't tell whether these were taken out in a strike on Mozdok, but there's certainly 2 Sukhois that are not Su-34s that are not going to fly again. That's for sure. Okay, now China has asked Kyiv not to attack Moscow during the May the 9th parade. So we've heard that. We've not heard. We've actually seen Chinese soldiers. I reported that yesterday. Chinese soldiers doing their practice parades around Moscow. So we know that they're going to be there. We also know that a number of different dignitaries are going to turn up to the May the 9th parade, but it's going to be your usuals. However, in fact, I'll bring this forward to be honest. We've just heard that Vučić, so the Serbian leader, and Fico, who were planning to attend the Moscow parade on May the 9th, have suddenly fallen ill. The EU earlier criticised their plans and warning of risks of Serbia's membership and Slovakia's reputation. I wonder how Orban's health is. So he seems to still be going, and Xi Jinping, I think, is likely to go as well. So there's this list of leaders that one of the controversial ones is Lula da Silva, the Brazilian, who's been offered, I think, 6 times to talk with Zelensky. He's turned them down each time, and now he's turning up. So that's a real letdown for Brazil, looking more in line with Russia at the moment. And unfortunately, you've got, I think, China turning up. But then most of the rest of these leaders are from fairly disreputable countries. But anyway, China has warned Kyiv not to attack Moscow. Zelensky's come out and said, oh, no, maybe it's back over here. Anyway, Zelensky's come out and said, no, we're still going to attack. No, he said, I cannot promise that you'll be safe if you basically go to Moscow. Here we go, I found it. President Zelensky warned that Ukraine cannot guarantee the safety of any world leaders attending events in Moscow on May the 9th. He reiterated his call for a 30-day ceasefire, arguing that meaningful agreements are impossible within just a few days. I personally think this will be getting people to worry in Moscow. I doubt, but I don't know. It could go either way. But what I would do is just, like I said the other day, say that you can't guarantee the safety of people in Moscow. Get people to leak that you're going to do some major strikes on Moscow. Get Moscow to cack themselves, bring all their air defense systems to Moscow, make sure it's to the hilt, and then just hit elsewhere where they've taken their air defenses from. I'm not sure that you're going to get too much value from hitting Moscow, and just concentrate on taking out military targets elsewhere, like we saw last night. It's really good to see such a wide-scale attack from the Ukrainians last night. I'd love to know what was definitely hit. So as mentioned, Vučić and Fico not going to May the 9th. Let's talk oil. More tough reading for Putin, says Tim White in our other section. As global oil prices continue to fall, it's worth noting that natural gas prices also are down. They're down 16% in a month. Russia hoped gas increases would help stave off bankruptcy, but look at Urals oil prices at the bottom. Putin's lifeline is down another 5% yesterday, and this is what Tim White said yesterday, so it's 2 days ago. Urals are at $55 there. They need it above 60 to even break even, as far as I know, and it's going south. Now, what's even worse news for Russia, as being part of OPEC Plus, is that OPEC Plus has agreed on another output surge in June, accelerating a revival of supply for a second month. So they want more oil to be on the market. Part of the reason this could be to try and hit the American shale oil production that is a much more expensive oil to produce. And in order to screw that industry over, OPEC can cleverly flood the market with lots of oil to bring the price down. So you bring the price down, screw the American shale oil industry. But the flip side is, the collateral of that approach is the oil price is down and Russia gets screwed. When the oil price is down, it's much more expensive for them to extract oil than places like Saudi Arabia, who don't have any, maintenance issues. They don't have any sanctions on them. They can easily get the oil out of the ground and have all of their equipment maintained as efficiently as possible. The Russians, not so much. So it becomes more and more expensive as the months go by for Russia to extract their oil, and that means they need oil to be at a much higher price to make a profit off that. So OPEC Plus reducing the price of oil by surging the market is precisely what Russia doesn't want, and that's brilliant. Key nations led by Saudi Arabia and Russia agreed on Saturday to add 411,000 barrels a day next month. So you get this double whammy where you think, okay, add more barrels, that overcomes the low prices. which if you were making a profit, then let's okay, it's low, but it's still a profit. There's still a margin on that. Let's produce as much as possible so we can get that small margin magnified, right? But if it goes into the negative, if you're making a loss, then the more you're producing will amplify the loss. And that sucks, right? So that's good news for, I think, for those of us supportive of Ukraine. Now, Yevgen Istribian says OPEC will likely raise oil production for the second time in a row. Brent, $50. Russia collapses. So we've got a little readout here. OPEC Plus agrees another oil supply surge in June. Delegates say. Summary from Bloomberg AI. OPEC Plus agreed to add 411,000 barrels a day, as we heard, mirroring a similar increase announced last month. The strategy shift is seen as a way to discipline overproducing members, particularly Kazakhstan, and to lower oil prices, which could strengthen ties with US President Donald Trump. So although I talked about shale oil, which was one theory, but it could also be about getting oil prices down, which is something that Trump wants. So Trump wants low oil prices because that will undercut inflation. That will hopefully, act to keep inflation down as the prices of energy, price of oil is down. So there are differing theories going around. So the move has sent crude prices plunging, threatening oil firms and OPEC Plus members, including the Saudis, who need oil prices above $90 to cover government spending. Well, that's interesting. So that goes against what I was just saying, because actually that threatening oil firms and OPEC members such as Saudi Arabia, but it seems to be driven by Saudi Arabia. So I'm not sure how that makes much sense, because it's the Saudis that are trying to keep the prices low. And of course, if that screws them over, they're unlikely to do that. Anyway, so I'm not sure I agree with that. OPEC, but what do I know? OPEC Plus agreed on another output surge in June, accelerating revival of supply for a second month as group's leaders seek to chastise overproducing members in a strategy shift that has sent crude prices plunging. Key nations led by Saudi Arabia and Russia agreed to that. So, it seems like Russia and Saudi Arabia are behind that, but of course that's going to screw Russia over. News of and that had happened previously, by the way, when OPEC Plus had agreed to increase oil production, Russia signed up to that as OPEC Plus members. But actually, at that time they did that previously. That was hurting Russia. But they kind of want to, I guess, just go along with what the other OPEC Plus members were wanting, probably to keep them on side, to keep on side with them as their kind of global currency, if you like. PR currency was dwindling. News of a new batch of Russian sanctions coming from both the US, and potential sanctions from the US. I talked about that yesterday. We don't know if that's going to happen, but they are being discussed and put together, but they will need signing off by Trump, obviously. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But news of potential US sanctions and the 17th package from the EU. News of that hit the Russian markets today, and the Russian markets didn't like it very much. So again, good news for Ukraine, as that will hurt the Russian economy. Right, at the current pace, says a report in Forbes by David Axe, strong supporter of Ukraine, doesn't always get things 100% correct. But nevertheless, it would take Russia 231 years and 100 million plus casualties to conquer Ukraine. Despite losing 36,600 troops and 4,800 vehicles in April alone, Russia's force is growing, is now 600,000 strong, thanks to mass recruitment and wartime spending. And we talked a lot about Russian recruitment recently. Now, I'm not going to read this out because it's a huge thread, and I think it's now one of 3 threads on this. And this particular thread is like 30-something long. But the Moskva that was sunk, there is now, a massive report out on what happened. And Chris Owicki has put that into a number of threads. Just to read the very beginning, a detailed inside account of the sinking of the Russian missile cruiser Moskva has been published. It describes how the ship was overwhelmed with fire and smoke, safety systems failed, interior structures collapsed, and crewmen jumped out through portholes to save themselves. It was in a poor state, the Moskva, and that had been understood by previous reports, and even when other nations had seen the Moskva there were some rumours that it was not in a good way. Right, just moving on from that though, so you can go and find Chris Owicki on both Blue Sky and Twitter, but I'd prefer you to try Blue Sky and check that out yourselves. Or the link to all of these pieces will be into these tweets or posts. That's the word. It will be in the description below. Worrying bit of news is that a Soviet satellite the size of a car will crash to Earth between May the 7th and May the 13th, according to Live Science. In March 1972, the USSR launched the Cosmos 482 probe to explore Venus, but due to a rocket failure, the device failed and remained in Earth's orbit, and that may well come down. There's also news of one of their new satellites that's something to do with their nuclear capabilities in space span out of control as well. So I don't think things are going particularly well for the Russians on that. Well, although this has been lost since 1972, I would assume. So there's no reflection on recent Russian space woes. But my goodness, I don't think it's that size of space debris flying through the atmosphere and hurtling towards Earth. I was just thinking, goodness me, I hope we'd have a good few hours to work out exactly where that's going to land, because I don't have a basement, and even if I did, that would be offer scant protection to something flying at that speed. Right, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated not that a war in Ukraine is not important, but I would say what's happening with China is more important in the long term for the future of the world. We're not going to give up on it, i.e. Ukraine, but there does come a point where the president has to decide how much more time at the highest levels of our government do you dedicate when maybe one of the two sides, or maybe both, aren't really close enough, when we've got so many, and I would argue more important issues going on around the world. I presume he means that first one, maybe one of the two sides, Russia's not playing ball, but then he adds in, well, because he can't just single out Russia, he goes, and maybe both sides aren't really close enough. I hope that's a way to interpret that. But again, indications that the US it might walk away from the Ukraine-Russia peace negotiations. I think that they are just normalizing the idea that they are going to walk away now, talking about it a lot, and then eventually it will happen, which is a massive moral and political shame. But some would say that actually better they're nothing to do with it now than it's something to do with it, but favouring the Russian side in all reality. There were some claims that there's a whole bunch of military aid that might come from the US. Again, might be to do with the minerals deal, but there was talk about the PDA being released, and like I'm reading a bunch of stuff today. I'm going to look into it. I'll probably do a live stream of my military aid stuff, just because there's quite a lot to clear, and I might even talk about sort of Australian and UK elections on that as well, so you can look out for that in a wee while. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, really appreciate your support, take care, and please do remember that we are continuing the Car for Ukraine campaign fundraiser. That is not that, Car for Ukraine, if I can actually type, that would help. That is still ongoing. We are at fourth position, around the 15,000 mark. It'd be absolutely great to get it over the line. That will continue until we do so. Thank you so much to those who have really kindly donated right throughout the period of the campaign. The most recent ones here, so Simon Keep and Kevin Davidson, thank you very much. You're on the donor walls. It's not the size of the dog in a fight, but the size of a fight in a dog. Get them, guys. Well said, Kevin. Really appreciated. Take care, everybody. Speak soon. Tilda Pips.